In a crowded airport terminal filled with thousands of rushing travelers, a single father named Warren watched as person after person walked past a deaf woman named Beatrice, who was desperately trying to communicate with an airline employee, and everyone ignored her as if she was invisible. And Warren felt his chest tighten because he had seen this exact scene play out with his own daughter Piper countless times, and he knew the pain of being overlooked and dismissed, simply because you communicate differently. And what happened next in that busy airport would remind everyone watching that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply stop and see someone. And this is the story of how one man's personal experience with his deaf daughter led him to become the voice for a stranger who needed help, and how that single act of kindness rippled out in ways that neither of them could have imagined. Main story. Warren Matthews stood in Terminal C of Chicago O'Hare International Airport with his carry-on bag slung over his shoulder and his phone in his hand, checking his flight status for what felt like the 100th time that morning. And he was stressed because his connecting flight had been delayed twice already, and he was supposed to be in Seattle for an important business meeting in less than 6 hours. And if he missed this next flight, there would be no other options until tomorrow, and his entire work trip would be ruined. The airport was absolute chaos. That Tuesday morning, with hundreds of people rushing in every direction, pulling suitcases and carrying coffee cups and staring at their phones, and the noise level was overwhelming with announcements blaring over the PA system and children crying, and people talking loudly on their phones, and the general hum of thousands of human voices, all competing for attention. And Warren felt his stress level rising because he hated crowds, and he hated feeling out of control. And right now, he felt both. Had been traveling for work more frequently over the past year, since his wife Linda had passed away from cancer, and he was now raising their 8-year-old daughter Piper alone. And the increased travel meant more income, which they desperately needed, but it also meant more time away from Piper and more guilt about leaving her with his sister Julie while he was gone. And Warren was constantly struggling to balance his responsibilities as a provider with his desire to be present as a father. As Warren stood near the gate area waiting for his boarding group to be called, he noticed a woman standing at the customer service desk about 20 feet away, and she was trying to communicate with the airline employee behind the counter. But something was clearly not working, because the woman was making hand gestures, and the employee was shaking her head with an expression of confusion and frustration. And Warren watched as the woman pulled out her phone and tried to type something to show the employee, but the employee barely glanced at it before turning away to help another customer. Warren recognized immediately what was happening, because he had seen this exact scenario dozens of times with his daughter Piper, who had been born profoundly deaf, and the woman at the counter was clearly deaf and was trying to use sign language to communicate, but the airline employee did not understand sign language, and instead of trying to find a solution or showing patience, she was simply dismissing the woman and moving on to help other customers who could speak. Warren felt a familiar anger rising in his chest because he knew exactly how humiliating and frustrating this experience was for the deaf woman. And he thought about all the times he had watched Piper try to communicate with store clerks or restaurant servers or other children on the playground, only to be ignored or dismissed or treated as if she was somehow less than because she could not hear. And he remembered one particular incident that still made his blood boil, even though it had happened over a year ago. Piper had been 7 years old, and Warren had taken her to a local ice cream shop to celebrate her getting an A on a math test, and Piper had been so excited and had practiced signing what flavor she wanted all the way there in the car. And when they got to the counter, Piper had used sign language to indicate that she wanted chocolate ice cream, with sprinkles, and the teenage clerk behind. The counter had looked at her with confusion, and then looked at Warren and said, "What is wrong with her?" And Warren had felt his face get hot with anger. But before he could respond, Piper had grabbed his arm and signed to him that it was okay, and she would just point at the menu instead. But it was not okay, because that clerk's words and dismissive attitude had implied that there was something wrong with Piper, when in fact, there was nothing wrong with her at all, and she was simply a child who communicated differently. And Warren had watched his daughter's excitement and joy deflate in that moment, as she realized once again that the world was not built for people like her, and that she would have to constantly adapt and accommodate others, while very few people would make any effort to meet her halfway. Warren had filed a complaint with the ice cream shop manager and had made sure the clerk understood why her words were hurtful and inappropriate, but the damage had already been done. And Piper had been quieter than usual for the rest of that day, and Warren had held her that night before bed and signed to her that she was perfect, exactly as she was, and that the problem was not with her, but with people who lacked understanding and compassion. And Piper had nodded, but Warren could see in her eyes that she did not fully believe him, because she had experienced too many moments of rejection and dismissal in her young life. Now standing in this crowded airport, watching another deaf woman being ignored and dismissed, Warren felt that same protective anger and frustration, and he looked at his watch and saw that his flight would be boarding in about 15 minutes, and he knew he should just stay where he was and focus on getting to his gate on time. But he also knew that he could not just walk away and leave this woman to struggle alone, because if someone did that to Piper, he would want another person to step in and help. Warren took a deep breath and walked over to the customer service desk, where the deaf woman was now standing off to the side, looking distressed and close to tears, and several other passengers were crowding around the desk demanding help with their own flight issues, and the airline employee was clearly overwhelmed and was not even acknowledging the deaf woman anymore, and Warren approached the woman and gently tapped her shoulder to get her attention. The woman turned to look at Warren with a guarded expression, because she was probably used to people approaching her with impatience or frustration, and Warren smiled warmly and then signed, "Hello. My name is Warren, and I noticed you are having trouble with the airline employee, and I would like to help if I can." And the woman's eyes widened with surprise and relief, and she signed back, "Thank you so much. My name is Beatrice, and I'm trying to find out about my flight, but no one will help me." Warren signed back, "What flight are you trying to check on?" And Beatrice pulled out her phone and showed him her boarding pass, which indicated she was supposed to be on a flight to Denver that was scheduled to depart in 30 minutes. And Warren looked at the departure board on the wall and saw that the Denver flight had been canceled, and he turned back to Beatrice and signed, "I am sorry, but your flight has been canceled," and Beatrice's face fell, and she signed back, "Oh no. I have to get to Denver today. My mother is having surgery tomorrow morning, and I promised I would be there." Warren felt a wave of sympathy, because he understood what it was like to face an urgent situation and have obstacles thrown in your way. And he signed to Beatrice, "Let me talk to the airline employee and see if we can get you on another flight," and Beatrice signed, "Thank you, you are very kind." And Warren could see tears forming in her eyes, and he gave her an encouraging smile, and then turned to approach the customer service desk. The airline employee, whose name tag said. Rachel looked harried and exhausted, and when Warren stepped up to the counter, she said with barely concealed irritation, "I will be with you in a moment, sir." And Warren said, "I am not here for myself. I am helping the deaf woman who was trying to get your attention earlier." And Rachel glanced over at Beatrice, and then back at Warren and said, "I am sorry, but I do not know sign language, and I could not understand what she wanted." And Warren tried to keep his voice calm and said, "That is understandable, but you could have written notes back and forth or found someone who could help translate." Instead of just ignoring her, Rachel's expression became defensive, and she said, "I was not ignoring her. I was trying to help other customers." And Warren said, by turning away from her and refusing to even try to communicate, "You were absolutely ignoring her, and she is a paying customer who deserves the same level of service as everyone else. And now her flight has been canceled, and she needs to get to Denver as soon as possible because her mother is having surgery tomorrow. So can you please help us find her another flight?" Rachel sighed and said, "Let me check what is available," and she typed on her computer for a moment, and then said the next available flight to Denver is not until tomorrow afternoon, and it is already fully booked. And Warren said, "What about flights to other nearby cities or connections through other airports?" And Rachel checked again and said, "There is a flight leaving in 2 hours that goes to Salt Lake City and then connects to Denver, and she would arrive late tonight around 11, but that flight is also nearly full, and it would cost extra to rebook. Warren turned to Beatrice and signed what Rachel had told him, and Beatrice looked stressed and signed back. I cannot afford to pay extra. I am already struggling financially, and I bought this ticket weeks ago, and it is not my fault the airline canceled the flight, and Warren signed. I understand. Let me see what I can do. And he turned back to Rachel and said, this woman should not have to pay extra because the airline canceled her original flight. So, can you please waive the rebooking fee and get her on that Salt Lake City flight? Rachel said, I do not have the authority to waive fees. And Warren said, then please get someone who does have that authority, because this is not acceptable. And Rachel looked annoyed, but she picked up the phone and called a supervisor, and after a few minutes a man in a suit appeared and introduced himself as David, the customer service manager, and Warren explained the situation again, and David listened and then said, we can waive the rebooking fee given the circumstances and get Ms. Beatrice on the Salt Lake City flight. Warren thanked David and then signed to Beatrice telling her the good news, and Beatrice's face lit up with relief and gratitude. And she signed, thank you so much, I do not know what I would have done without your help, and Warren signed, you are welcome. I am glad I could help, and Beatrice signed, sign language, because you have a deaf family member, and Warren nodded and signed. Yes, my daughter Piper is deaf and I learned sign language when she was a baby so we could communicate. Beatrice signed, your daughter is very lucky to have a father who cares enough to learn, and Warren signed, I am the lucky one because Piper has taught me more about patience and understanding and seeing the world differently than anyone else ever could. And Beatrice smiled and signed, she sounds like a wonderful girl, and Warren signed, she is the best thing in my life. And then he checked his watch and realized that his own flight was now boarding, and he needed to get to his gate quickly. Warren signed to Beatrice, I have to go catch my flight, but I hope everything goes well with your mother's surgery. And Beatrice signed, thank you again for everything you did. For me today, you restored my faith in people. And Warren signed, just pay it forward someday when you see someone who needs help. And Beatrice nodded and signed, I will. I promise. And then she surprised Warren by giving him a quick hug, and Warren hugged her back, and then turned and hurried toward his gate. As Warren rushed through the terminal, weaving between other travelers, he thought about how close he had come to just walking past Beatrice and ignoring her situation because he was stressed about his own flight and his own problems. But he was so glad that he had stopped and helped, because it had reminded him of why he worked so hard to teach Piper about kindness and compassion and standing up for people who were being overlooked or marginalized. Warren made it to his gate just as they were calling the final boarding group, and he got on the plane and found his seat. And as the plane took off, he pulled out his phone and looked at the photo on his lock screen, which was a picture of Piper smiling and signing I love you, and he felt a wave of emotion because he missed his daughter terribly when he traveled, and he could not wait to get home and tell her about what had happened at the airport when Warren finally arrived in Seattle. Later that day, he went straight to his hotel and called his sister Julie to check in, and Julie answered and said, Hi, Warren. How was your flight? And Warren said it was fine. But I had an interesting experience at the airport this morning, and he told Julie the whole story about Beatrice and how he had helped her. And Julie said, that was really kind of you. Warren and I am sure it meant the world to that woman. Warren said I kept thinking about Piper and all the times people have ignored her or dismissed her, and I just could not walk away. And Julie said Piper is so lucky to have you as her dad. And Warren said, can I talk to her? And Julie said, of course, hold on. And a moment later, Piper's face appeared on the video call, and she signed, Hi, Daddy, I miss you, and Warren signed, I miss you too, sweetheart. How was school today? Piper signed, it was good. We learned about fractions and math, and I sat with my friend Emma at lunch, and Warren signed, that sounds great. And then he told Piper about meeting Beatrice at the airport and how he had helped her, and Piper listened with rapt attention, and when Warren finished, she signed Daddy. I am proud of you for helping her." And Warren felt his eyes getting misty. And he signed, "I am proud of you too, Piper, because you are the reason I knew I had to help." And Piper smiled and signed, "I love you." Daddy and Warren signed, "I love you too. And I will be home in 3 days." After Warren ended the video call, he sat on his hotel bed for a long time thinking about his life and his daughter and the unexpected encounter at the airport. And he realized that even though his life had been incredibly difficult since Linda had died, and even though he was constantly stressed about money and work and being a good single parent, he was also incredibly blessed, because Piper had taught him to see the world through different eyes and to understand that everyone deserves to be seen and heard and valued, regardless of how they communicate. The next morning, Warren attended his business meeting, and it went well, and he secured a new contract for his company, which meant more financial security for him and Piper. And after the meeting, his boss congratulated him and took him out to lunch. And during lunch, Warren found himself telling his boss about the encounter with Beatrice at the airport. And his boss listened thoughtfully and then said, "Warren, you are a good man, and what you did for that woman was admirable." And Warren said, "I only did what anyone should do." But Warren's boss shook his head and said, "No. Warren, most people would not have stopped to help, and most people would have been too focused on their own problems and their own stress to even notice that woman struggling. And the fact that you took the time to help her, even though you were worried about missing your own flight, says a lot about your character." And Warren felt embarrassed by the praise, but also grateful because it was nice to be acknowledged and appreciated. Over the next few days, Warren completed his business in Seattle and then flew home to Chicago. And when he walked through his front door, Piper came running and threw her arms around him, and Warren picked her up and spun her around even, though she was really getting too big for that. And Piper laughed and signed, "I missed you so much, Daddy," and Warren signed, "I missed you too." And then he set her down and signed, "I have something for you." Warren pulled out a small snow globe he had bought at the Seattle airport that had the Space Needle inside, and Piper's eyes lit up because she collected snow globes, and she signed, "Thank you, Daddy. It is beautiful." And Warren signed, "You are welcome." And then Julie appeared from the kitchen and said, "Welcome home, Warren. How was the trip?" And Warren said it was good. "And thanks for watching." Piper and Julie said, "Anytime. You know, I love spending time with her." And Warren smiled gratefully. That evening, after Julie had gone home, and Warren had made dinner and helped Piper with her homework, they sat together on the couch, and Warren told Piper more details about helping Beatrice at the airport. And Piper asked lots of questions, signing, "Did she seem scared?" And Warren signed, "Yes. I think she was scared and frustrated because no one would help her." And Piper signed, "I know how that feels." And Warren signed, "I know you do, sweetheart. And that is why we always have to be kind to people who are struggling." Piper was quiet for a moment, and then she signed, "Daddy. Do you think I will always have trouble communicating with people who do not know sign language?" And Warren thought carefully before answering, because he did not want to lie to his daughter, but he also did not want to discourage her. And he signed, "Piper. There will always be some people who do not understand or who are not patient enough to try. But there will also be people like me and Aunt Julie and your teachers and your friends who love you and will always make sure you are heard and understood, and you are strong enough to handle the people who do not get it." Piper nodded slowly and signed, "I wish everyone knew sign language," and Warren signed, "Me too. But even though not everyone knows sign language, everyone can choose to be kind and patient and to really see people instead of just looking past them. And that is what I try to teach you every day." And Piper signed, "You are a good teacher." Daddy and Warren felt a lump form in his throat, and he pulled his daughter close and held her tight. A few weeks after Warren returned from his Seattle trip, he received an unexpected email from someone named Beatrice Johnson, and when he opened it, the email said, "Dear Warren, I hope this message finds you well, and I hope you remember me from the airport in Chicago a few weeks ago. where you helped me when no one else would. And I wanted to reach out to tell you that my mother's surgery went well, and she is recovering nicely, and I made it to Denver in time. Thanks to your help." The email continued. "I also wanted to tell you that your kindness that day inspired me to make some changes in my own life. And I have started volunteering with an organization that advocates for deaf and hard of hearing individuals and helps educate the public about how to better communicate with and accommodate people with hearing disabilities. And every time I share my story about what happened at the airport, I tell people about you and how you stopped to help when everyone else walked by." Beatrice's email went on. "I know you said you helped me because of your daughter Piper, and I want you to know that she is lucky to have a father like you. And I hope someday I can meet her and tell her how her dad made such a difference in my life, and if there is ever anything I can do to support you or Piper, please do not hesitate to reach out, and I have included my contact information below. And I hope we can stay in touch, Warren." Read the email 3 times and felt deeply moved that his simple act of kindness had had such a lasting impact on Beatrice's life. And he wrote back, thanking her for the email and telling her how glad he was that her mother was doing well, and he told her about Piper's activities and interests, and he said he would love to stay in touch, and maybe someday they could meet in person. Over the following months, Warren and Beatrice exchanged several emails, and they developed a friendship based on their shared understanding of what it meant to navigate a world that was not always accommodating to deaf individuals. And Beatrice sent Warren information about advocacy organizations and resources that might be helpful for Piper and Warren, shared stories about Piper's experiences at school and the challenges and triumphs they faced together. One day, Beatrice emailed Warren with an exciting proposition, and she said that the advocacy organization she had been volunteering with was planning a conference in Chicago, and they were looking for speakers who could share personal stories about the importance of inclusion and accessibility. And Beatrice suggested that Warren and Piper might be interested in speaking at the conference. And Warren was intrigued but nervous because he had never spoken publicly about their experiences. Warren talked to Piper about the opportunity, and Piper was excited and signed, "Yes, Daddy, I want to do it. I want to tell people what it is like to be deaf and how they can help." And Warren signed, "Are you sure? Because there will be a lot of people there." And Piper signed, "I am sure I am not scared." And Warren signed, "Okay, then let us do it together." Warren contacted Beatrice and told her they would be honored to speak at the conference. And Beatrice was thrilled, and she helped them prepare their presentation. And on the day of the conference, Warren and Piper stood on stage in front of hundreds of people, and Warren spoke about the challenges of raising a deaf child in a hearing world, and Piper signed her own story about what it felt like to be overlooked and ignored, and how much it meant when people took the time to learn even a few basic signs. The audience was deeply moved by their presentation, and many people came up to them afterward to thank them, and to ask questions and to share their own stories. And Warren realized that by speaking out, they were helping to change perceptions and create more awareness and understanding. And he felt proud of himself, and especially proud of Piper, who had been so brave and articulate. Beatrice was at the conference, and she finally got to meet Piper in person, and the two of them hugged, and Beatrice signed to Piper, "You are just as wonderful as your father said you were." And Piper beamed with pride and signed, "Thank you for inviting us to speak." And Beatrice signed, "No. Thank you for being willing to share your story and help others understand." After the conference, Warren and Piper's lives continued much as before, with the daily routines of school and work and the ongoing challenges of communication and accessibility. But something had shifted inside both of them, because they had seen the power of sharing their story, and they had realized that their experiences could help educate and inspire others, and they made a commitment to continue advocating for the deaf community whenever they had the opportunity. Warren also made a personal commitment to always stop and help when he saw someone struggling, especially if that person was deaf or had another disability, because he understood now more than ever that a single act of kindness could ripple out in unexpected ways and could literally change the course of someone's life, just as his decision to help Beatrice in the airport had led to a friendship and to speaking opportunities and to greater advocacy. Work Piper continued to grow and thrive, and as she got older, she became more confident in advocating for herself and educating others about deaf culture and sign language. And Warren watched with pride as his daughter transformed from a shy child who sometimes felt invisible into a strong, articulate young person who demanded to be seen and heard, and he knew that Linda would have been so proud of the person Piper was becoming. Warren often thought back to that chaotic morning in the Chicago airport when he had been stressed about his flight and worried about his meeting, and he had seen Beatrice struggling at the customer service desk, and he had made the split-second decision to stop and help. And he realized that in that moment, he had been at a crossroads between self-absorption and compassion, between rushing past someone in need and choosing to see them and acknowledge their humanity. And Warren was so grateful that he had chosen compassion, because that choice had not only helped Beatrice in her moment of need, but it had also enriched his own life and had reinforced, for Piper, the values that Warren tried so hard to instill in her about kindness and empathy, and standing up for people who were marginalized or overlooked, and it had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond that single interaction. The story of Warren and Beatrice and their chance encounter in the airport eventually spread through the deaf community and the advocacy organizations they worked with, and it became a powerful example of why representation matters and why it is so important for hearing people to learn about and understand the experiences of deaf individuals, and why simple acts of kindness and acknowledgement can have such profound impacts. Warren was invited to speak at other conferences and events, and he always brought Piper with him when he could, and together they became well-known advocates for deaf awareness and inclusion, and they worked with schools and businesses to implement better practices for communicating with and accommodating deaf employees and customers, and they helped train airline staff and retail workers and others about how to be more inclusive. Beatrice remained a close friend and continued her own advocacy work, and she often collaborated with Warren and Piper on various projects and initiatives, and the three of them formed a strong bond based on their shared commitment to creating a more accessible and understanding world. And whenever they told the story of how they met in the airport, people were always moved and inspired. Years later, when Piper was preparing to go to college, she wrote her admissions essay about the experience of being deaf and about watching her father stop to help a stranger in an airport, and about how that moment had taught her that she was not alone, and that there were people in the world who would always fight for her and stand with her and advocate for her right to be seen. And Piper was accepted to her top choice university, and she decided to study social work with a focus on disability advocacy. And Warren could not have been more proud, because he knew that his daughter was going to make a real difference in the world, and he knew that the challenges she had faced as a deaf child had shaped her into a compassionate, empathetic person who understood what it meant to struggle and who was committed to helping others. On the day Warren dropped Piper off at college, he felt a mix of emotions, including pride and sadness and anxiety about letting his daughter go out into the world alone. But he also felt confident that Piper was ready, because he had spent her entire life preparing her for this moment and teaching her to be strong and resilient, and to never let anyone make her feel less than. As Warren hugged Piper goodbye in her dorm room, she signed to him, "Daddy, thank you for always believing in me and for teaching me to stand up for myself and for showing me what real kindness looks like." And Warren signed, "I love you, Piper, and I am so proud of the person you have become." And Piper signed, "I love you too, and I will make you proud." And Warren signed, "You already have." Driving home from the college, Warren thought about everything that had happened since that morning in the Chicago airport, when he had made the choice to stop and help Beatrice, and he thought about all the ways that single decision had changed the trajectory of his and Piper's lives, and he felt grateful that he had listened to his instincts and had chosen compassion over convenience. Warren also thought about all the other people in the world who were facing their own struggles and challenges, and who were being overlooked or ignored or dismissed, and he hoped that his story and Piper's story would inspire others to pay attention, and to see the people around them, and to offer help when it was needed, and to remember that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The lesson that Warren had learned that day in the airport, and that he had tried to pass on to Piper, was that we are all connected, and that what we do for others, we ultimately do for ourselves. Because when we help someone else, we make the world a better place for everyone. And when we choose kindness over indifference, we create ripples that spread out in ways we can never fully predict or measure. And so, Warren continued to live his life guided by the principles of compassion and advocacy and inclusion, and he continued to teach others about the deaf community and to fight for better accessibility and understanding. And he never forgot the look of relief and gratitude on Beatrice's face when he had first signed to her in that busy airport terminal and offered to help. The story of Warren and Beatrice became a reminder that in a world that often feels chaotic and impersonal and overwhelming, we all have the power to make a difference through simple acts of kindness, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply stop and see someone who is struggling and offer our help without expecting anything in return. And that when we do that, we not only change their life, but we also change our own.